I'm Jeff Cunningham, professor at Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Thunderbird School of Global Management. Welcome to iconicvoices.tv. If the forebears of John McCain had remained in their ancestral Scotland, we'd have to call him Sir John or Lord McCain. That's the way things are in the UK. But this is the United States, and we like to shuffle the cards every few years and see some new faces. Even iconic statesmen like Henry Kissinger are given the bum's rush by a new generation. Yet for nearly 6 terms now, the senator from Arizona manages to do the extraordinary. He keeps appearing at the top of the deck. Is it his ability to communicate? The New York Times implied that after 30 years of delivering the message on weekend political shows, Senator McCain deserves a Lifetime Achievement Oscar. Could it be that we're taken by his natural-born skepticism? On the Hill, Senator McCain is known as the dude with tude and rebel without a pause. Maybe his stealth weapon is Winston Churchill's secret for defeating Hitler: overwhelm them with energy. Well, we'd surely understand if he chose to spend his days seeing how his tomatoes are growing. Yet instead, Senator McCain heads off to Serbia to see how the refugee problem is growing. I'm delighted to welcome my fellow Scotsman who began his distinguished journey at a naval base in the Panama Canal and then was appointed to the U.S. Naval Academy before being dropped unceremoniously into a POW prison in Hanoi, and from that strange place and time to nearly 6 terms in the United States Senate. Once again, Senator John McCain. With that, I'll just add that I serve on the Board of Trustees of a fantastic geopolitical think tank, which happens to go by the name the McCain Institute. There's no coincidence, but just in full disclosure. Senator, Justice Scalia dies, Apple against the FBI, and the Pope dumps Trump. It's harder to figure out where to start than the Super Bowl lottery. What's your take on these?
My take is we're in the most unusual period of American political history that I think we've seen in modern times. Could I just make one comment? Congratulations on being part of, I think, a premier school of journalism in America. And I'd like to mention one historical incident. I was a new congressman back many years ago in 1983, which happened to be the 10th anniversary of the ending of the Vietnam War. And I got a phone call from Walter Cronkite. And Walter Cronkite asked if I wanted to go with him back to Vietnam, where I had spent 5.5 years on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the end of the war. He and I and a producer and a cameraman then, in a circuitous route, spent about a week in Hanoi together. And a lot of us don't really appreciate, unless we were around at the time, Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America. Year after year after year, he was voted that. And people had appointment viewing. People made it a point to watch the evening news and Walter Cronkite. So I can't tell you what a thrill it was for me to be able to spend some days with the premier journalist of the 20th century. So I think you should be proud to carry on his tradition of journalism at its finest. Finally, in answer to your question, I have never seen anything like it. I know of no political pundit who has predicted it, and I don't know what's going to happen next. So, but let me try to trace a little bit of the origins of this for you to help understand it a little better. There's a lot of Americans that are very angry. There's a lot of Americans, millions, who have stopped looking for work. There are millions of Americans who have not seen any improvement in their lives since the economic crash of 2008. And there's a lot of middle-aged and older Americans that yearn for a previous era in our history where we had steadily improving economies, where we were the strongest nation in the world, where we weren't facing these challenges which many Americans find hard to understand and comprehend in this new brand of radical Islam, which is carrying out acts on the United States of America in the case of San Bernardino. So there's a great deal of unhappiness, and there's also a great deal of uncertainty. That's why this phrase of Donald Trump, "Make America Great Again," that's his, obviously his slogan. And my friends, America is the greatest and strongest nation on earth. Have no doubt about it. Would you like to be the Chinese, and every few days in Beijing you can't see a block because of the air pollution and their one-child policy that they had for so long, which is making China a very geriatric nation? Would you like to be the Europeans who right now are trying to grapple with an unprecedented event of these millions, hundreds of thousands of migrants, refugees that are flowing into their country? So I have no doubt about America and its future. But right now, very accurately, a lot of Americans find us in a period of uncertainty and even crisis that they want something different. And their anger and frustration is directed to a large degree to Washington, D.C. And the approval rating of Congress is 14%. Is there anyone here who is in the 14% that approves of Congress? Please raise your hand. Well, if you just raise your hand, please do not drive an automobile here in the valley. You're a danger to yourself and others. So anyway, I just finally say I was in Omaha yesterday, and I landed at the airport at Sky Harbor. A guy runs up to me and said, "Say, anybody ever tell you look a lot like Senator John McCain?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Doesn't it sometimes make you mad as heck?" So thank you, Jeff, for being here.
Senator, one of the consequences of the agitation or anger that you're talking about is that millennials are turning out to be supporters of Senator Bernie Sanders. I read that 36% of millennials are still living with their parents. Could it be they're attracted to him because he looks like someone they live with?
I think one of the reasons why they're attracted to him is because his view that there'll be a free education. One of the things, and I'm sure people in this room are carrying this burden of student loans. There's so many young Americans that, particularly if you go into professions like medicine and others, where they're carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans, it takes them years to pay off. Bernie's saying everybody's going to have a free education. And yes, it's a simplistic statement, but I also think the other problem that Hillary Clinton has is this issue of trust. If you look at probably the most important polling number you should look at when you consider the chances of a candidate for success is trust. Because if people don't trust a candidate, then they're not willing to examine their other qualities. And right now, Secretary Clinton's trust numbers are in the 30s, even with Democrats.
Do you sense that the flip side is the mirror image? Is that
Yes.
Trump's the enthusiasm for Trump mirrors the same thing as Sanders?
Well, the other day I was talking to a guy, and I said, "Who are you for?" He says, "Trump." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because he's going to make America great again," and he tells it like it is. And I said, "Well, who's your second choice?" He said, "Sanders." Maybe the extremes have come around to meet at the other end, but there is a certain sameness to their appeal. They're not going to be part of the establishment. They're taking on the party apparatus. They're the underdogs. There's a certain sameness to the message that both of them are finding to have great resonance.
So we're looking at what not several months ago would have been the unthinkable.
These are the most interesting times. My friends, you'll be telling your grandchildren, if they ever ask about it, about this political campaign, because none of us have ever seen anything like it before, and I hope we never see anything like it again.
Is this going to be a palate cleanser, like the sorbet between courses?
I don't know. I just don't know. But I really feel that we, people like me, probably underestimated the frustration, frankly, which is fed to some degree by some of the talk shows that are, demand purity in all of us, that it is exacerbated a sense of frustration that Americans feel, and a bit of fear, because my friends, I'm sorry to tell you this, but in the words of the Director of National Intelligence before the Senate Armed Services Committee last week, there will be more attacks on the United States of America. There will be.
Tell us about that.
That is going to obviously unsettle Americans even more. Right now, Mr. Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, is calling in young men, I think only young men, and he's saying, look, join the refugee flow. Here's an internet site for you to use. Get to fill in the blank country, contact us, and we will work on a terrorist attack. It's just happening. And Mr. Baghdadi, who spent 4 years in our American prison camp in Iraq from 2006 to 2010, when he was leaving, the Americans recognized him as a leader, and they spoke to him on his way out, and he said, I'll see you in New York. That was Mr. Baghdadi's statement, and we should take him at his word. They don't think they can destroy America, but they sure think that they can inflict significant damage, and so you're going to see San Bernardino over again.
Would you step back for a moment, trace this back to two things? The Iranian defense minister is in Moscow, I presume doing some shopping with the check that we just handed over. And you were in Serbia dealing or helping to deal with the refugee flow. How do those things come together and relate to our world?
I know that there are some people in this room who are supporters of the president, and I respect that. And I respect those of you that are of the Democratic Party. But I can assure you that I and Lindsey Graham predicted everything that has happened, because this refugee situation is not like a tsunami or an earthquake. It's because failed policies over the years by this administration have led to a situation where people now are fleeing because they can't survive where they are. And I'm not going to take all your time to tell you exactly those decisions along the way, but it had to do with pulling everybody out of Iraq. It had to do with our failure to help the Free Syrian Army with assistance, and it had to do when the president said that Syria, Bashar Assad had crossed the red line using chemical weapons, said we were going to respond and didn't. And that's why you see these Middle Eastern countries no longer trusting the United States and acting on their own. You mentioned, Jeff, I was in Serbia last Friday, and I watched these refugees coming across the border, being talked to by the Serbian police and military, and then put on trains to go to the Serbian border on their way to Germany. The Serbs aren't letting any of them stay in Serbia, and they don't want to stay in Serbia. They want to get to Germany. And Angela Merkel, as you know, the Chancellor of Germany, her approval ratings have plummeted because the Germans are getting very, very upset about these thousands and thousands. And the other thing that struck me when I saw these refugees was a large number of them were from Afghanistan and other countries besides Syria and Iraq. And the other thing that was interesting is that about 3/4 of them were young men between the age of about 18 and 30. The overwhelming majority of them were. So we're now seeing strains on the European Union that have never been since the European Union was formed up. I think it was 1947.
It's been an argument waged that terrorists are using refugees as a caravan to infiltrate. What does that spell for Europe?
I think you're going to see more Paris-like attacks. I don't think there's any doubt you're going to see that. And therefore, there's going to be a backlash against these refugees. I'm sure many of you saw that in Cologne on New Year's Eve, there were some attacks or attempts at attacks on German women from some of these non-Europeans. And I'm not saying they were Syrians, I don't know, but they were refugees. And as is understandable, the German public was very angry about this, to have a celebration of New Year's Eve being marred by attacks, physical attacks by what they viewed as refugees. So, and could I just mention one other thing? ISIS is metastasizing. In case you missed it, today we have the news that American aircraft bombed, guess where? Libya. The ISIS has established an outpost there. The information that I have, there's about 5,000 of them in Libya. They're in Nigeria, in Boko Haram. They are in the Sinai. They are metastasizing in the Middle East in a way that it poses a great danger, frankly, to all of them and the entire region, particularly those Middle Eastern countries that have, frankly, undemocratic governments. It's a breeding ground for them.
In the middle of this environment, it was thought that people at Apple and people at the FBI thought that a good public fight would make a lot of sense right now. Wouldn't there be a better way to resolve this issue of Syed Farouk's telephone?
First of all, I think you could make an argument that if there was information in someone's home about an attack on the United States of America or individuals, I think it would be obvious to all of us that you would go to court, get a court order for a search warrant, and go into that home so as to prevent further attacks. Now this is obviously a matter of technology. And I understand Apple's argument that they do not want to make their systems more vulnerable to cyber attacks. I think there's legitimacy to that. And you know, I hate commissions because they usually come up with nothing. It's usually a way to pay some lawyers and issue a report that nobody reads or pays any attention to. But in this case, I think we've got to have some kind of meeting of the minds between Silicon Valley and national security. It's the same argument and debate we're having about the rights of the individual and the need to have security to protect our citizenry. And this is now a very high stakes game, and if you believe Apple, it would mean their ability to compete with these devices that are made in other countries that are not required to have this ability to go in. So I think we ought to try to get some of the best brains in America together, and people like Admiral Rogers, the head of Cyber Command, and Mr. Comey, the director of the FBI, and sit down. There must be a solution to this, my friends, because we obviously don't want people to have secure sites that they can, at will, plot attacks on the United States of America. But at the same time, we don't want government interfering with our privacy. We have a fundamental right of privacy. So I think you're going to see a whole lot more debate on this issue before we get it resolved.
Senator, would you comment on that other bundle of joy, Kim Jong-un, who the Chinese refer to as the third fatty? And what is China's interest in protecting North Korea?
The rotund ruler, as I like to describe him, who is this is a very dangerous person because I'm not sure about his rationality. This latest missile launch of theirs is very dangerous. They're one step away, maybe not one step, but getting nearer to the capability of launching an intercontinental ballistic missile that would hit the United States of America. That's very dangerous in his hands. Who's the key to all this? The Chinese. The Chinese could shut down the North Korean economy in a week. That they're just so dependent on the Chinese government. Now, the Chinese, for years, had some legitimacy to their propping up the North Korean regime because they didn't want a united peninsula of Korea on their doorstep. South Korea is no threat to China. South Korea would be spending the next 30 years trying to bring the North Korean economy up to that of the South Koreans. But they insist on propping up this terrible regime. I mean, but my friends, they have 400, this guy we joke about, he has 400,000 people in a gulag where they're being starved and beaten every single day. It's horrible. It's the last modern gulag modeled after the old Soviet Union. So it's the Chinese. And the Chinese now are acting in a very aggressive fashion. I'm sure you may have seen where they put in missile capabilities into islands that they filled in, which are in total violation of international law. We may have time to talk about what the Iranians did to our sailors, but I think it's very dangerous. I think it's dangerous, and I think as long as China props up this regime, and we joke about this guy, but believe me, he's dangerous. And so it's another challenge.
If the Chinese put a missile on an island that's a fake island, have they really put a missile on it?
They put missiles on it according to our intelligence, and the law of the sea is an international law. There's various agreements and treaties that have been signed, is that you do not put military installations on islands that are in international waters. Now, you could under islands that you claim and could go through the court, but they are in violation of international law, including the law of the sea treaty, which we are not signatories to, by the way. You have to caveat that. But they are now moving in. Look, here's the reason for all this, my friends. The Chinese view the last 200 years as aberrations of history. They are convinced that China's role, a dominant role in Asia, is their heritage and their future. And all of us for years used to credit the Chinese with seeing around the corner of history and being omniscient and wise and all that. Well, they've managed to alienate and scare the daylights out of every other country in the region. And by the way, to show how provocative they are, they put those missiles in at the same time the other Asian countries were meeting in California with Barack Obama. I mean, that is thumb in the eye.
Subtle.
Sure. And so, but one, I told you about their pollution. Two, I told you about their aging population. Three, they have these state-owned enterprises that are collapsing as we speak. Their economy is gone, it's still strong, but it continues down, and that is being reflected in stock markets all over the world. And they have united the other countries in the region in a way that 15 years ago we would thought not possible. And every time you read about somebody in China has been arrested for corruption, it's not corruption, my friend. It is the new leader of China asserting himself and accumulating power in a way that nobody has since Deng Xiaoping. It's not corruption. It is got to do with getting rid of potential adversaries.
On the military, first, you're very involved in Veterans Affairs as chairman of the Armed Services Committee. What's happening with the veteran situation, which you've talked about, and just if you would, the future of women in combat?
I think the future of women in combat is a pretty easy one I'd like to take first. That is, if women are qualified, they are clearly should be engaged in combat if that is their desire to do so. We have all volunteer force. Women have already proven their mettle in various aspects of combat. I do believe we have to maintain the same physical standards. I really do, because when you're talking about people like special forces, they just really have to have the physical capability, and so you need to keep those same standards. But there's too many women who have been involved in too much combat for the old idea that women are not qualified. They're more than qualified. Our member of Congress from Tucson, Martha McSally, she was a commander of an A-10 squadron. She was in combat, and she not only was in combat, she led. So on the other,
Veterans.
it's a sad story, my friends. It all started here in Phoenix with 50 veterans allegedly died while awaiting care on a non-existent waiting list, and it's ricocheted throughout the entire VA. And there's good people who work for the VA, but the bureaucracy is really got a very long way to go. There's two really answers to this. One is hold people accountable, which they are still not doing. They've only fired one person. But the second thing is to give our veterans a choice. I negotiated after this scandal with Bernie Sanders. In those days, he didn't used to brush his hair. And he is an announced socialist, as you know. So his solution to the VA issue was just make the VA bigger. My solution was primarily based on the choice card. In other words, if a veteran lives a certain distance away or has to wait a certain period of time, that veteran can take a card and go to the health care provider of his or her choice. Now, I'd like to see that universal, but I had to compromise with Bernie on this geographic aspect of it all. There's no reason why a veteran should check in at the VA and then say you're on a waiting list for 2 or 3 weeks or a month. That's crazy. And so I want to see that happen. Second of all, is that, my friends, a lot of Americans are not aware that 8,000 veterans commit suicide every year. That's a national shame, of course. And we passed a bill, again, that I wrote called the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention Act. I am very proud of the city of Phoenix. The city of Phoenix does not have a single homeless veteran because of work done by the city of Phoenix. And there's several indicators of a veteran who it may consider suicide, and one of them, prime indicators, is not having a home. So I'm very place to live. So I'm very proud of what we have done there. We have a long way to go. The VA does the best of anybody on PTSD, on traumatic brain injury, on prostheses, those things related to combat. But I have to tell you, my friends, as far as other areas of healthcare needs, they're outside or as good or better. So why not let the veteran choose as to where that veteran wants to go to get medical care? So it's like turning around a super tanker, my friends. It takes a long time to turn this whole thing around. We have a new head of the VA here in Phoenix who I just happened to have met today. I think she's doing a good job. I really do. But I also think you need to hold people accountable. And right now, people are not being held accountable.
So
and I'm sorry for the long answer.
My last question, you've written, by my count, 6 books. And I wondered if it's your philosophy, to quote Churchill, history is going to be very kind to me, for I intend to write it.
Yes, I've had a very fortunate life, the most fortunate of anyone you will ever talk to, and some of that I have put into writing, and I've tried to be honest about it. But I've also tried to write books about men and women who serve and have served as an inspiration to others. I write about periods of our history, and I'm very glad that I've been able to do that. The first book I wrote is still probably, which is about my family and my early life, and my ability to intercept a surface-to-air missile with my own airplane, which was not the way we wanted to do to win the war, but other than that, so I'm very fortunate.
We're open to questions. My
friends, Moldova, by economic indicators, any organization will tell you is the poorest nation in Europe. And it is not a member of NATO, and it is a prime target of Vladimir Putin. And because of the extreme poverty, there is terrible human trafficking that goes on in that country. Young women routinely are taken and sold or stolen and taken into other parts of Europe or other parts of the world. It is so sad and heartbreaking. It is wrenching because these young women are in their teens, obviously. I'm proud of my wife and other organizations who are working very hard on this issue. It is so horrible, a lot of us just shy away from it. But all I can say is that Moldova is also experiencing extreme pressures from Vladimir Putin, and the politics in the country are very uncertain, particularly because of the poor economic conditions. I will do everything in my power to see that there's free and fair elections no matter what the outcome of it is, and also to help address this terrible tragedy of what's happening to young women in that country. That if you go to Moldova, my friends, and you walk down the street of the capital, you will not see young women. You will not see them. On the issue of refugees, I'm a federalist. I believe that the government closest to the people is the best government, etc. But the refugee issue is a federal issue. It's not a state or mayor's issue. And I believe that if since this threat is real of an ISIS attack, then we should have a legitimate screening process to make sure that no one comes to this country and kills our citizens. And I think that in the meantime, we ought to have a pause until we put the procedures in place so that Americans can be sure that anyone who comes to this country is for the right reason. I do know that for a long period of time, since the end of World War I, when some colonels in a tent divided up that part of the world, as I'm sure you know, that they were they got along with each other. Sunni and Shia got along, Kurds got along. By the way, the Kurds are the largest ethnic group in the world without a nation of their own. I think it depends to some degree on the outcome of all this conflict and this fighting. And there's no doubt right now, there's many complicating factors in this whole ISIS, Bashar Assad, all of these issues, but one of them is the tension between Turkey and the Kurds. The Turks now are attacking the same people that we are supporting, KKG, and it's gotten very, very complicated. I know that there are many people that just sort of accept that there's going to be a de facto partition between Sunni and Shia and Kurds. I just don't think it's quite that easy. First of all, the question is what are the boundary lines? That might be of interest to those different groups. I think they've got a very good prime minister. I think he's doing a good job. I think there are very intense pressures from Vladimir Putin. I mean, very intense. As you know, there's a many centuries-old relationship between Serbia and Russia, and they are putting enormous pressures, the Russians, through the media, through activities that are less than legitimate in my view. And of course, they are appealing to the Serbian people because of this relationship that you're very familiar with. The Serbs, as you know, fought on the side of Russia, and there's very great deal of cultural and other relationships that go back between Serbia and Russia for a long time. Vladimir Putin is taking advantage of that. I believe that the Prime Minister is trying to steer a middle course, and I think he's pretty obviously, as you know, the most popular leader in Serbia today, and I was very favorably impressed by him. I think it's the economy, and for the first time since 1980, national security, terrorism, foreign policy. Obviously, that's triggered by the San Bernardino and the threats that we see of ISIS to the United States of America. First time in many years. The 2014 election, well, let me tell you, the 2012 election, foreign policy, national security was 8 or 9 in the priority list of the voters. Now it's right up there at the top. As you may know, 2 of my sons, one is on active duty, a Navy pilot, and the other is in the Guard, and he's served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I think when they tell me, but I also, you made an excellent point. I have seen many outstanding public servants who stayed too long. And the tragedy of that is you remember them how they were at the end and not how they were when they were at their best. And I don't want that to happen. And I can assure you there are some people in the Tea Party that believe that that should have been long ago. I think that if it were Donald Trump who were elected president, he would have the endorsement of the voters of America. I think that that when they vote in this election, one of the factors or issues they will be voting on is the next Supreme Court justice and who they would like to choose that justice, not a lame duck. And I'd also like to point out that President Obama announced his filibuster of Judge Alito back a number of years ago. And it was the Democrat leader Chuck Schumer who announced that in 2007, when we had a Republican president, that rather than choose a Supreme Court justice, we should wait until the next election so the American people would endorse it. Proving again that old adage, it's not where you stand, it's where you sit. I think that what ISIS has done is pervert an honorable religion. The scholars that I know on the Muslim faith reject totally the ISIS approach to their interpretation of the Quran. But having said that, we need more and more, we need a lot more of our leaders in the Muslim community, the respected clerics, others who are leaders, to stand up and condemn ISIS. I want to see more of that because young people who are choosing what kind of the Muslim religion that they support, I don't believe are getting enough direction from respected members of the Muslim community. It's one of the more difficult challenges that we have. I would argue on K through 12 that competition is important, and one of the reasons why I support charter schools. I am not arguing that charter schools are better or worse than public schools. I am arguing that with competition we find excellence, and that's one of the reasons why I think our program here in Arizona on charter schools is good. As far as the college education is concerned, frankly, I don't have a lot of good answers on that, on secondary schooling. I do know that we should make loans more available. We should have more scholarship programs, but we're still seeing an inordinate rise in college education costs that far exceed that of inflation in America. And I think we're going to have to sit down and have a dialogue about it. Cyber is the challenge of the 21st century. Our former chairman of the Joint Chiefs was asked, what about potential challenges that America faces? He said, we have a significant advantage in every challenge except for one, cyber. And my friends, there is no doubt that the threat of cyber attacks can do all kinds of terrible things. So we have to spend money on it. We have to have a policy, which we don't have now. and we're going to have to get some of the brightest minds in America to work on it. And that may mean something like a cyber corps that of people who are really trained and good in understanding cyber rather than the traditional way up through the military or the civilian service, where it is a major challenge.